"You're not half the woman your sister is," my mom said at dinner. I pushed my chair back and said, "Then she can start paying your rent." Dad turned pale. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating, and for a split second, everything around me seemed to freeze. My mother's voice echoed in my ears, almost as if the sound itself had traveled through time, following me all the way back to my childhood. When her praise for Vivian had always drowned out any recognition for me, it was as if I was still that quiet second daughter, standing in the shadow of my sister's achievements. The knife in my hand, which had been cutting through the roast chicken, suddenly felt heavier. My father's face drained of color. He blinked rapidly, as though he couldn't quite believe what he had just heard. My sister, Vivian, sat at the end of the table, her usual smug grin flickering with confusion, but her gaze never left her phone. She didn't understand the weight of what had just been said. She never did. For years, I had been invisible to them, a background figure in a family that had already decided who the star was. It was never me. I had been the one who made sure everything worked behind the scenes. At 17, I paid my own tuition. In college, I juggled 2 jobs. And when my parents struggled to make mortgage payments, I quietly stepped in, never asking for help, never wanting credit. The truth, however, was never acknowledged, not by my parents, not by anyone. It was always Vivian, always her accomplishments, her victories, her future. I was just there. That moment, though, something inside me snapped. I had spent too many years silently holding everything together. I couldn't do it anymore. Not now. Not with those words hanging over my head. I could feel the tension in the air, the way everything had shifted, the weight of the years pushing down on my chest. I hadn't meant to say it. But when the words left my mouth, it was as though a dam had broken. The truth I'd buried for so long, spilled out, unfiltered. "Then she can start paying your rent," I said, my voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins. Silence fell over the table. Even the clink of silverware stopped. My mother's face twisted in disbelief, her lips parting as if to speak but no words came out. My father's face was a study in pale horror, like I had just exposed something he couldn't quite handle. Vivian was still scrolling through her phone, unaware of the storm that had just erupted. But my father finally looked up, his eyes wide with confusion. "What rent?" he whispered, as if the very idea that I could be paying for their house, keeping it standing, was something beyond comprehension. I felt my chest tighten as I held his gaze. This had been my secret. A secret I kept for years, silently carrying the weight of their financial burden. No one ever knew. No one ever asked. They just assumed I was the quiet one who couldn't possibly be doing something important. But I was. And it was time they knew. The shock on their faces was everything I had expected. And more. My mother's usual dismissive tone faltered. For the first time, she was caught off guard. My father's panic was palpable. They had never seen me like this before, never seen me stand up for myself in this way. I wasn't the daughter who kept quiet anymore. The silence stretched between us, filled with the unspoken words of years gone by. The weight of it felt like 100 pounds lifting off my shoulders. I wasn't just challenging their narrative of who I was. I was rewriting it. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let them make me disappear. I met my mother's eyes, steady, unwavering. "You didn't think I knew?" I asked, my voice low but sure. "I've been paying the mortgage for 3 years. Every month. On time." My mother's face faltered. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to make sense of it. She was calculating the lies she could spin, the way she could make this all disappear, like she had done so many times before. But not this time. Not tonight. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The noise sliced through the room, shattering the fragile illusion of calm. My father looked like he might speak, but his voice caught in his throat. Without another word, I turned and walked away. Stepping out of the dining room, and into the cold air of the evening. The door shut behind me with a soft click, and as I stood there on the front porch, my breath clouding in the night air, I felt something shift inside me. The storm inside had passed, but the silence that followed was unlike any I had ever known. This wasn't anger. It wasn't regret. It was freedom. I wasn't gonna play the role they had written for me anymore. I was done being invisible. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had just begun to exist. I stepped outside, the cold Portland air biting at my skin. My breath misted in the night, but I barely felt it. The rush of adrenaline still buzzed through my veins, louder than the world around me. My feet moved before I could even think, leading me to the street corner. The house, their house, stood behind me, a beacon of the life I had just walked away from. The moment I had spoken those words, I had no idea what would happen next. It wasn't a calculated move. It wasn't some premeditated, brave act of defiance. It was just the truth, raw and unexpected, spilling out in the most irretrievable way. For the first time in years, I had stood up for myself. And now, standing outside in the quiet of the night, the silence in my chest felt like a promise I was still trying to understand. I couldn't go back in. Not now. Not like this. As I stood there, the weight of the evening began to settle in. The door had slammed behind me. But it wasn't just the door to the house that had closed. It felt like I had shut the door on everything that had kept me small. The family dinners where I would sit quietly, hiding in the background, letting Vivian take the spotlight. The way I would swallow my frustrations, bury them under layers of politeness. No more. I was done living in the margins of their story. For too long. I had allowed them to rewrite my role without even asking. In the quiet of my own thoughts, I realized how long I had lived with that heaviness. I had been invisible for years, and tonight, I had thrown that invisibility away. Still, there was fear. The kind that wraps itself around your chest and squeezes tight. It was a familiar feeling, one that I had learned to live with, but it felt different now. It wasn't just the fear of disappointing them anymore. It was the fear of what I had just done. The fear of stepping out into the open, where there was no longer any pretense. I turned and walked down the sidewalk, my footsteps sharp against the pavement. The sound of the city felt distant, muted, as though I was walking in a bubble, alone with my thoughts. Vivian's face flashed in my mind, her wide-eyed expression as I had spoken. It wasn't surprise, not exactly. It was more like disbelief, as though she couldn't quite grasp that I had said something that could disrupt the comfortable little world they had created. My mother's face was even harder to read, but there was something there, something beneath her usual mask of control. And my father. He had looked pale, like a man who had just woken up to something he didn't want to know. I had never been the one to make waves. I had always been the good daughter. The one who went along with everything. But for the first time in years, I realized I didn't have to keep pretending anymore. As I reached my apartment, I glanced up at the windows, glowing softly in the dark. This was mine, no one else's. There was no one inside to judge me, to tell me who I should be. It was just me, and that felt like a revelation. I had spent so long trying to earn my place in that house, trying to fit into the role they had made for me. But I didn't need their validation anymore. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and immediately felt the quiet embrace of my own space. The familiar smell of the coffee I had brewed earlier lingered in the air, and the soft hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment. The relief hit me in waves. But there was something else too. Something sharper. The truth. It was like a light had been switched on, and I couldn't turn it off. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. I hesitated before pulling it out. Almost expecting it to be my mother, my father, maybe Vivian, trying to explain or apologize or tell me to come back. But it wasn't them. It was Jessica. I opened the message of, "Are you okay?" I felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. Jessica always knew when something was off. It wasn't just the message. It was the way she cared, the way she understood without needing me to say much. I typed back, "I'm fine. Just needed to breathe for a bit." The reply came almost immediately, "Good. You deserve it. You've been holding it all in for too long. Don't forget, you're not alone in this." I leaned back against the wall, taking a deep breath. Jessica had always been my anchor, the one person who never tried to make me fit into their mold. She had seen me. Really seen me. Not as Vivian's quieter sister. Not as the daughter, who did everything without asking for anything in return. But as myself. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel that way too. I set the phone down, walking into my kitchen and opening the fridge. I had always kept things neat. Always had a system, a way to keep my life organized. It was a small comfort, knowing that I was in control of this space, this life. It was mine. I poured myself a glass of water and took a slow sip, letting the coolness settle in my throat. My thoughts drifted back to the dinner. My mother's words still echoed in my mind. "You're not half the woman your sister is." They had stung more than I expected. But what hurt more was how long I had let them be true. How long I had let myself stay in the background. That was over now. I set the glass down on the counter and turned toward the window. The view of the river, bathed in the soft light of the street lamps, felt peaceful, almost surreal. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The next few days felt like I was walking in a fog, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The shock from the dinner hadn't worn off. If anything, it had settled deeper, like a bruise I couldn't touch. I hadn't expected things to go so far, but in the quiet moments I realized that the words I had spoken were just the beginning. The beginning of what, exactly, I wasn't sure. But something had changed in me, and there was no going back. I went to work the next day, the rhythm of spreadsheets and numbers offering a strange comfort. There, in the hum of the office, and the familiar faces of colleagues who barely knew my story, I felt like I could breathe again. The office was predictable, controlled. The chaos of family, of feeling invisible and constantly overlooked, wasn't here. Here, I was someone who mattered. But the weight of the dinner, of the truth that had spilled out, was still with me. That evening, I decided to stop by the grocery store before heading home. The bright lights of the store felt jarring, almost artificial, like they couldn't quite capture the stillness inside me. I walked down the aisles, filling my cart with the usual things: pasta, fresh vegetables, coffee. Routine. But as I reached the checkout, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I hesitated before pulling it out, half expecting it to be my mother, maybe Vivian, some kind of follow-up. Instead, it was a message from Jessica. "I'm coming over. We need to talk." The message struck me in an unexpected way. For a moment, I wondered if I was about to get a lecture, some well-meaning advice to make peace with my family, to go back and fix things. But Jessica didn't work like that. She was always blunt, always the one who told me what I needed to hear, whether I liked it or not. When I got home, I didn't bother with the usual routine of cooking. I just dropped the grocery bags on the counter, pulled out a bottle of wine, and opened it. I needed something to settle the nerves that had been buzzing under my skin ever since the dinner. The doorbell rang soon after, and I didn't even hesitate before answering. Jessica said, stepping inside. Her eyes immediately searched mine, as if she was trying to gauge how I was really doing. Her smile was small, but genuine. She could always tell when I was putting on a front. I've been thinking about you. And about what happened. I led her into the living room, where we both sat down on the couch. I hadn't said much about the dinner to her yet. I'd kept it all inside, trying to process what I'd done, what had been said, and what it meant. I know you're probably thinking I'm crazy, I said, trying to laugh, but it came out hollow. But I couldn't just let it go. They've been doing this to me for years, pretending I don't exist unless it's convenient for them. Jessica nodded, her gaze soft. No, you're not crazy. You're just finally seeing what's been there all along. And you're standing up for yourself, which is something I know you've never done before. I looked down at my hands, wrapped around the wine glass, and felt the weight of her words settle inside me. I didn't want it to be like this. I just wanted to be enough. I thought if I kept quiet, kept doing the right thing, maybe they would see me. Maybe they would finally notice. They noticed, Jessica said gently. But they only noticed when you stood up for yourself. You're not invisible anymore, Jojo. The words hit harder than I expected. It was as if something clicked inside me. I hadn't just spoken the truth to my family. I had spoken it to myself. I hadn't been invisible. I had allowed myself to be overlooked. And now, I had to face what that meant. Do you think I did the right thing? I asked, the question more vulnerable than I meant for it to be. Jessica tilted her head, studying me for a moment before answering. I think it was the hardest thing you could have done. But the right thing, absolutely. You've spent your whole life pretending to be something you're not, silent, small, easy to ignore. But that's not you. And I think, deep down, you know that now. I took a deep breath, trying to absorb her words. The truth felt like it was burning me from the inside out. I had lived in the shadow of my family for so long, never questioning it. But that dinner, that confrontation, had broken something open. And now I had to live with what had been exposed. I don't know what happens next, I said quietly. I don't know if they'll ever really see me for who I am. And I'm not sure I'm ready to deal with the fallout. Jessica reached out, placing a hand over mine. You don't have to figure it all out right now. Just take it one step at a time. You've already made the hardest choice. And you don't need their approval to be who you are. Her words, simple as they were, felt like the first real comfort I had received in a long time. I didn't know where this journey would take me, or if my family would ever truly understand what I had done. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to fit into their world. I was building my own. And that, for the first time, felt like enough. The days that followed felt like walking through a thick fog. I was moving through my routines, but I wasn't really present. Every time I sat at my desk, every time I walked into a meeting, I could hear my mother's words ringing in my ears. You're not half the woman your sister is. I had expected some kind of fallout, but not this weight, not this constant undercurrent of tension that seemed to follow me everywhere. I kept thinking about what I had done. In a way, I was proud of myself for speaking up, for finally putting my foot down. But there was also the other part of me, the part that still worried about the consequences, about what my family might think or say. I was caught between two realities: the person I had always been, the quiet daughter who kept the peace, and the person I was becoming, the one who no longer accepted the silence. I tried not to dwell on it, but my thoughts kept circling back to that moment. What had my parents really heard when I spoke? Did they understand the weight of what I had said? Did they realize how long I had carried that burden for them? Silently paying the bills, keeping things afloat without a single word of thanks. The phone call came on Thursday. It was my mother's name on the screen. I stared at it for a moment, unsure whether to pick up. I didn't want to hear whatever explanation or excuse she had ready for me. I didn't want to hear about how it was all a misunderstanding, or how she never meant for me to feel invisible. But I had to answer. I had to know. Jojo, my mother said, her voice tight, as though she had practiced the words she was about to speak. We need to talk. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. What's going on? I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. We wanted to apologize. She began, and I could almost hear her searching for the right words. We didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. Your father and I. We've been talking about it. I held my breath, waiting for her to continue. This was the part I hadn't been sure of, whether they would admit to their mistakes or try to sweep everything under the rug. We're sorry, Jojo. For not seeing you. For taking you for granted. She said, her voice softer now, like she was trying to make amends. You've always done so much for us. The words, though they stung, were unexpected. I hadn't been prepared for this kind of apology. I had imagined them denying everything. Or brushing it off as though it wasn't important. But hearing her finally say it, hearing her admit that they had overlooked me for so long, left me speechless. I didn't know how to respond right away. The part of me that had longed for recognition, for validation, felt like it was rising to the surface, and I didn't want to let it take over. But the other part of me, the one that had spent years burying those feelings, was cautious, wary. Was this genuine? Or was it just an attempt to make me go back to the way things had been? Thank you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I don't think things can just go back to the way they were. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could feel the weight of it. The realization settling in that this wasn't going to be as easy as they thought. There would be no simple fix, no sweeping it all under the rug. I understand, my mother finally said. We know you need space. We didn't know how to fix it, but we're willing to try. Try. I wasn't sure what that meant yet, but it was a start. A small, fragile start. I need time, I said, the words coming more easily now. I need time to figure out where I fit in all of this. Of course, she replied. We're not asking you forgive us right away, Jojo. We just want to try. I hung up the phone after that, the silence in the room feeling heavier than ever. Part of me felt a little lighter. A little less burdened by the weight of my own silence. But the other part of me was still uncertain. What would this really mean for us? Could I ever really go back to the way things were? Could I ever trust them to see me the way I needed to be seen? I walked into my living room and sat down on the couch. My thoughts were all over the place, pulling me in different directions. I wanted to believe that this apology meant something. But I also knew that my journey was far from over. My family wasn't going to change overnight. And neither was I. The doorbell rang suddenly, pulling me out of my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I just sat there, unsure of whether to answer, but then I heard a familiar voice from the other side. It's me, can I come in? It was Jessica. I smiled, rising to my feet. The sound of her voice was exactly what I needed right now. She had always been the one who saw me, really saw me, in ways that even I hadn't been able to. I opened the door, and there she stood, smiling back at me, her eyes full of understanding. Hey, she said, stepping inside. You okay? I nodded, taking a deep breath. Yeah, I said, the word feeling like a small victory. I'm okay. I think I'm finally starting to be. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed felt like a blur. My routine remained unchanged: work, home, and the occasional phone call from Jessica checking in on me. But something inside me had shifted. The silence I had carried for so long had broken open, and I wasn't sure how to piece it back together. I had done the hardest thing, but now I had to figure out what came next. I kept replaying that conversation with my mother. The apology was unexpected. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Yes, they had admitted their wrongs. But could I really trust them to change? Would this moment of sincerity hold? Or would I end up back in the same old role? The one where I was always the quiet one. The one who never asked for anything. I hadn't gone back to my parents' house since that night. It wasn't out of anger, but out of a need to breathe, to exist without their expectations hanging over me. I had told myself I would give it time, space to figure things out. But the longer I stayed away, the more I realized that the space I was creating wasn't just between me and them. It was between me and everything I had ever known. I woke up one morning, the city lights outside my window, still glowing faintly as the sun began to rise. I'd always been a morning person, the quiet of the early hours giving me a sense of peace before the rest of the world caught up. I sat by the window. The soft hum of the city, barely breaking the silence, and found myself thinking about the life I was building here in Seattle. It wasn't just about my job, or my apartment, or even the things I'd been doing to fill the hours. It was about the space I had created for myself. The small victories that no one else saw, the moments where I could just be, without anyone telling me who I should be. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for permission. I was living, fully and completely, on my own terms. I went for a run along the river that morning. The cool air cutting through me like a sharp reminder that I was here, and I was free. The rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement was steady, grounding me in a way that nothing else had. I could hear the sounds of the city waking up around me. But for a few moments, it was just me, the river, and the path stretching ahead. It felt good to be outside, to be moving, to be free of the weight of my past. But even as I felt lighter, I knew the past wasn't something I could simply outrun. The more I thought about my family, the more I realized that I couldn't just walk away from them. They were part of me, whether I liked it or not. I stopped at a bench by the river, catching my breath. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out. Surprised to see a message from my dad. I hadn't heard from him since the dinner, and the thought of opening his message made my heart race. Jojo, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I've been thinking about you. We miss you. Can we talk soon? I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. It was so normal. The words felt like a step back into the past, into the same space where they had always been. The space where I was the one who waited, who gave, who never asked for anything in return. But things had changed. I had changed, and I wasn't going to just slide back into the role they had set for me. I tapped out a response slowly, carefully choosing my words. I need more time, Dad. I'm still figuring things out. It felt like the right response. Honest. Acknowledging that I wasn't ready to return, but also not shutting the door completely. Later that day, I found myself standing in front of my new apartment, looking at the skyline. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. This was mine. No one could take it from me. Not my family, not anyone. It was a strange kind of liberation, one I hadn't known I needed until now. I had learned, in the past few weeks, that freedom wasn't just about escaping. It was about confronting the things that had held me back, and finding the courage to live outside of their expectations. I had spent too long trying to live up to a story that wasn't mine. But now, I was writing my own. The truth had been painful, yes, but it had also been the first step toward a life that was mine to shape. I wasn't sure what that would look like yet. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to apologize for it. I took a deep breath and smiled, feeling a quiet sense of pride swell inside me. It wasn't the kind of pride that came from proving something to anyone else. It was the pride of knowing I had finally chosen myself. And that was enough. It was a Sunday morning when the photo came through. I had just finished my coffee, and was scrolling through my phone, still wrapped in the stillness of the early hours, when I saw a picture of my childhood home, looking as perfect as it always had. But this time, there was something else. A banner stretched across the porch with bold letters. "Congratulations, Vivian, for preserving the family home." I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. This wasn't just a photo. It wasn't just an innocent celebration. This was the final, silent erasure of everything I had done for the past 3 years. The message had come from Mrs. Jensen, the elderly neighbor who always seemed to know everything that went on in our small suburban neighborhood. Her text was simple. "Just wanted to let you know, Vivian's the one keeping the house going. She's such a hero to your parents." As my hands felt cold as I set my phone down, I wanted to scream, to throw something. But instead, I felt a strange calm wash over me. It wasn't anger this time. It was something sharper, clearer. This wasn't just about the money, or the house, or the mortgage payments anymore. This was about the story they had created. The story where Vivian was the hero, and I was the one who didn't matter. I thought back to everything I had done to keep that house standing. The late night transfers, the sacrifices I had made, no vacations, no new clothes, no time for myself, just to make sure the payments were on time. And now, they were giving the credit to Vivian. She hadn't paid a cent. She hadn't lifted a finger. But there she was, in a photo, smiling with my parents, celebrated as the savior of a home that I had kept alive for years. I reached for my laptop, my fingers shaking as I opened a new file. I had to do something with this. I couldn't let it go. Not anymore. I went to the file where I had stored all the payment records. The dates, the amounts, the transactions. It was a quiet autobiography of sacrifice. A timeline of everything I had given. I had kept it all, just in case, though I had never thought I would need it. Now it felt like my only weapon. I spent the next few hours piecing it all together. Bar charts. Payment records. Screenshots of the messages from my mother. The ones where she had told me not to tell anyone, where she'd brushed off my contributions like they didn't matter. It was all there, laid out clearly in front of me. The next day, Sarah called. I hadn't heard from her much since the dinner, and I wasn't sure if it was because she didn't know what to say, or if she was just giving me space. But this call was different. "Nora," she said quietly, her voice a little strained. "I think you should know something. Your parents are planning a family appreciation dinner next month. They asked me to make a slideshow for it." I felt a lump form in my throat. A slideshow. My heart dropped. "What's the slideshow for?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "They want to highlight Vivian as the reason the house was saved," Sarah said, her voice filled with a mixture of discomfort and sympathy. "They gave me captions, Nora. They're calling her the anchor of the family. The savior." My head was spinning. The word, anchor, echoed in my mind, and I felt sick to my stomach. Vivian the savior. The truth was being rewritten right in front of me, and I couldn't let it stand. I had already let too much slide. I had already stayed silent for far too long. "Send me the file," I said, my voice steady even though my insides were churning. "I'll handle it." I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the decision settle in. I wasn't sure if I was ready for what was coming, but I knew I couldn't back down now. This wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about showing them the truth that had been buried for so long, ignored and erased. When Sarah sent me the file later that afternoon, I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through the slides. Photos of Vivian, of my parents, all framed with captions celebrating her achievements. The same old story. The story they wanted to believe. The story they had been telling themselves for years. But I wasn't going to let that story stand. I copied the file and added a new slide at the end. I inserted the timeline of payments, the bar charts, the dates, every single month I had paid for that house. And then the final slide. A photo of the house, with the words, "The truth deserves a place too." I saved the file to my laptop, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't revenge. This was simply the truth. And for once, I wasn't going to hide from it. I backed everything up on my phone, in the cloud, on a USB drive that I tucked into my bag. I wasn't sure when I would need it, but I wasn't taking any chances. Weeks passed. The dinner loomed closer, and my parents, oblivious to the storm that was building, continued on as if everything was fine. I kept to myself, going about my days, living my life on my terms. But in the back of my mind, the dinner was always there. Then, the invitation arrived. It was a simple message from my mother. "Family appreciation dinner. Please come, dressed nicely. We're so proud of Vivian." I stared at the message for a long time. My heart heavy with the weight of it. They didn't get it. They didn't understand that they had already lost me. But that wasn't the part that bothered me. What bothered me was the need to rewrite history. To make it fit into a story that they could all be proud of. I had a decision to make, and this time, I wasn't going to let anyone else write my story. When the day of the dinner arrived, I dressed carefully, not to impress them, but to take control of my own narrative. The night of the dinner arrived faster than I had expected. I stood in front of my mirror, adjusting the collar of my jacket, staring at my reflection. For the first time in years, I wasn't doing this for anyone else. I wasn't dressing to fit their expectations, or to play the part they had assigned me. I was doing it for myself. To mark the beginning of something new, something I was finally ready to face. I had spent so many years living in the shadows of my family's story, letting them define who I was. But tonight, I wasn't going to let them rewrite it. The truth was mine, and I wasn't afraid to show it. The dinner was being held at a fancy restaurant in downtown Seattle, one of those places with gleaming glass windows and soft, golden lighting. I arrived early, before anyone else, so I could collect myself. The valet took my keys, and I stood there for a moment, looking up at the building. It felt different now, like I was walking into a place where I no longer belonged, or perhaps a place where I was ready to confront everything I had been running from. Inside, the restaurant was warm, the air heavy with the scent of fresh bread and something rich, like rosemary and garlic. My parents were already there, sitting at the head of the table, Vivian next to them. The rest of the family trickled in, exchanging greetings, their voices mingling in a familiar hum of light conversation. I stood by the door for a moment unnoticed, my gaze on the small family gathering before me. They were so accustomed to their roles, the proud parents, the golden daughter. Everything was perfectly in place, just as they liked it. I could feel my pulse quicken as I walked toward them, the air thick with the tension I had been carrying for days. This wasn't just another family dinner. This was a performance. And tonight, I was going to change the script. My father looked up as I approached. His face softened when he saw me. But there was an unease in his eyes, a question hanging between us that neither of us was willing to ask. "You made it?" My mother said, a bit too cheerfully. It wasn't the warm greeting I was used to. There was something strained in her voice, as though she wasn't sure how to handle the changes I had brought into the family. I nodded, offering a polite smile, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were expecting me to slip back into my old role, quiet, compliant, and invisible. But I wasn't that person anymore, and I wasn't going to pretend. I took my seat at the table, the clink of silverware and glasses filling the air. As I sat there, I could feel the weight of their eyes on me. It wasn't just because I had walked in later than everyone else. It was the silence between us, the unspoken understanding that this night wasn't going to unfold the way they had planned. The slideshow started, as expected. Images of Vivian's smiling face appeared on the screen, her standing in front of the house, her arms outstretched like she had single-handedly saved it. The captions flowed, one after another, extolling her achievements. Vivian, the anchor of the family. Vivian, the one who kept us together during difficult times. I could hear the proud tone in my father's voice as he spoke. He looked at her with that same adoration he always had, his eyes shining with pride. I felt a pang of something: resentment, sadness, maybe even anger. But it didn't matter. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. As the last slide of Vivian flashed on the screen, I stood up slowly, the room falling quiet as I made my way to the front. My father's eyes widened, his smile faltering as he realized what was happening. Without a word, I plugged the USB drive into the computer. The room was still, the only sound the soft clicking of the keyboard. Then, the first bar chart appeared on the screen, followed by another. The dates, the payments, the amounts. Each one meticulously laid out for everyone to see. The truth, in full color. The silence in the room was deafening. My father's face turned pale, his lips pressing into a thin line. Vivian, ever the confident one, seemed frozen in place, her smile faltering as the reality of what I had done began to settle in. My mother sat there, her hands trembling slightly, as though she could already feel the ground shifting beneath her. The slideshow continued, the evidence of my sacrifices displayed for everyone to see. The text on the final slide read: "The truth deserves a place, too." The room was completely still. My family, my relatives, all of them stared at the screen in disbelief. I met my father's eyes, my voice steady as I spoke. For 3 years, I paid the mortgage. Every month, without anyone knowing, without anyone asking. I did this, not Vivian. It's time you understood that. My father tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. He began, but I cut him off. No, Dad, I said, my voice calm, but firm. You wanted a story where Vivian was the hero. You wanted a story where I didn't matter. But I do matter. I've always mattered. And this is the truth. Vivian shifted in her seat, her expression one of shock, then defensiveness. She looked at me as though trying to find words. None came. The truth hung in the air, and there was no going back. I didn't ask for this, she said, her voice thin, almost pleading. Maybe you misheard? Maybe Mom didn't mean it that way. I shook my head. No, Vivian. You were never the hero. You just let them believe it. You let them rewrite everything I did. I turned back to my parents. This family isn't just about the story you tell. It's about the truth you choose to see. And now, you're gonna see me. I didn't stay for their response. The room was frozen in time, my parents, Vivian, the relatives, they were all trapped in their own shock. I didn't need to say anything else. I had said enough. I walked out of the restaurant, the cool air outside feeling more like freedom than I ever thought it could. I didn't care if they understood now. I didn't care if they tried to rewrite the story again. The truth had been spoken. And I was done shrinking to fit their narrative. For the first time in my life, I was living in my own truth. And that, more than anything, felt like home. The days after the dinner were quiet. I had expected them to come after me, to try and smooth things over, but they didn't. Not at first. I wondered if they were still processing everything, or if they were simply too ashamed to reach out. I wasn't sure which one it was. I wasn't going to make the first move. Not this time. My phone buzzed a few days later, and I saw my father's name flash across the screen. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. I had prepared myself for this, for the inevitable moment when they would try to reframe the situation, to shift the blame, or perhaps even apologize. But I didn't know what to expect from them anymore. Jojo. My father's voice sounded tired. Can we talk? Sore, I said, trying to sound as composed as I could. What's on your mind? There was a pause before he spoke again, the silence stretching between us. "We've been talking about everything, your mother and I," he began, his voice lower now. "We've been thinking about how things have been, and how they've been for you. We understand now, more than we did before." The words were soft, almost hesitant. And I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was relief. Or maybe it was just a mixture of disappointment and wariness. "I'm glad you understand," I said quietly, looking out the window at the gray sky. "But understanding isn't enough. You can't just pretend everything's fine because you finally see it. I've been invisible for a long time. I've been invisible because you let me be." I could feel my heart pounding as I spoke, the years of holding back finally coming to the surface. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about me. About who I was in their eyes, and how I had let them define me for far too long. "We never meant to make you feel that way," my father said, his voice softer now, almost apologetic. "But we're ready to make it right. We can't undo what's been done. But we can try. We've talked, and we want to do better. We want you to know that we see you." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his words settle in. For a second, it felt like a relief. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. "I don't know if it's enough," I said, the words coming out quietly. "You've seen me now. But I've spent so long being ignored, so long being pushed to the side, that I'm not sure what comes next. I need more than just an apology. I need you to show me that you're really going to change, that this isn't just something that'll pass with time." My father didn't answer immediately, but I could hear the sigh on the other end of the line. "We will, Jojo," he said, his voice steady but full of regret. "We'll prove it to you." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure what to say. Maybe I needed time to believe it, to let their words sink in, or maybe I just needed time to forgive them. But I wasn't ready for that yet, not when I still felt like I was standing in the aftermath of everything they had overlooked. "I'll need time," I said finally. "But I'll be around. I need things to be different." "I understand," my father replied softly, and for the first time in a long time, I heard something in his voice that resembled sincerity. We ended the call a few moments later, and I sat there in the silence of my apartment, letting the weight of the conversation settle over me. Part of me wanted to believe them. Part of me wanted to step back into their world, to be a part of the family again, in the way they wanted. But the other part of me knew that things couldn't go back to the way they were. I had changed. I had found my voice, and that couldn't be taken away. Later that evening, I sat down at my laptop, the file I had saved a few days ago still open. I ran my fingers over the keys, considering everything I had done. I had stood up for myself. I had revealed the truth. But that wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the beginning. The next day, I received another message. It was from Sarah again, and when I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. "They want your name on the house. They want to give you credit for everything you've done." I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to process the words. They had always been so quick to give Vivian everything. But now they wanted to give me something. I wasn't sure how to feel about it. It wasn't that I didn't want recognition, but the more I thought about it, the less important it seemed. I had spent so long craving their approval, but now I realized that I didn't need it. I didn't need a piece of paper or a deed to prove my worth. What mattered was the truth, the journey I had taken, and the strength I had found in myself. I sent a reply to Sarah, my fingers steady as I typed. "I don't need it. I have my own place now, my own life. What I needed was respect and honesty. And I think for the first time, I have that." I hit send, and the weight that had been pressing on my chest for so long lifted just a little. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't holding on to the past. I had let go of the things that had kept me small, and I had stepped into my own light. That evening, as I stood on my balcony, watching the lights of the city twinkle below me, I realized something. I didn't need my family to rewrite my story. I had already done it. And for the first time, it felt like I was living the life I was always meant to lead. Maybe things with my parents would never be perfect. Maybe the rift between us would take years to heal, if it ever did. But I was done disappearing into the background. I was done being the quiet one. The truth had been spoken, and for once, I was ready to live it. And that was enough.